Welcome. So glad to have folks here. My name is Amy Antonucci, and I'm happy to welcome you to our New Hampshire Peace Action Peace and Justice Conversation Series online on March 11th, 2024, featuring Kathy Kelly, speaking about holding war profiteers accountable. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all. In that spirit of respect, we would like to start with an acknowledgement that we are doing our work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook people. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and those people who have been in relationship throughout the generations. Quick reminder on Zoom guidelines, you will be muted unless you raise your hand. Once we get there, I'll unmute folks. But we do love it when you have your video on. We understand not everyone likes to do that, but you're definitely welcome to, as we love seeing folks. Tonight, we are really excited to welcome back, sort of to New Hampshire, once again, Kathy Kelly, a longtime peace activist and author who many of us have been learning from and working with for decades. I, along with a lot of other folks, became acquainted with Kathy in the 1990s when she was a voice for the people of Iraq who were suffering under U.S. sanctions. From 1996 to 2003, she traveled 27 times to Iraq, defying the economic sanctions, and she remained in Iraq throughout the shock and awe bombing and the initial weeks of the U.S. invasion. She has also made over 24 trips to Afghanistan between 2010 and 2019, living with Afghan Peace Volunteers. She's the board president of World Beyond War, co-coordinator of the Ban Killer Drones campaign, and she's been helping to convene the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. And that's what she'll be talking with us about tonight. We'll hear from her and then move on to Q&A. The chat is open and later we'll be taking hands. But for now, join me in a very visible welcome to Kathy Kelly.
Well, thank you, Amy, for that introduction, and Doreen and Amy for welcoming me to this conversation. I've been looking forward to it, even though the subject grows increasingly troubling as every day goes by, and U.S. weapons make us even more complicit every day in the killing and the slaughter of innocents. That I'm thinking particularly of Gaza. You know, there's a novel called Lark and Termite by Jane Ann Phillips. And in it, it's about a Korean War soldier. And at one point, wearied by the war and homesick, he says, "The planes always come, like planets on rotation, a timed bloodletting with different excuses." And for the war profiteers in our world, that's not something that is an unhappy statement. In a way, they know that their profits are likely to increase, that the wars showcase their weapons, and that they have never really been held accountable in any way with severe consequences for them. And so that was the genesis of the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal efforts that began about 2 years ago. But there's quite a history to that. I wanted to start with an audio tape, and I'm so sorry. I thought I had it embedded in a PowerPoint, and it's just not going to happen. So I'll tell you about it. Maybe you know about this. At the very end of World War I, when the armistice was declared, it was quite deliberately set for the 11th minute of the 11th hour of the 11th month in 1918 And the audio tape that was taken at the front between the warring parties shows that the explosions continued right up until that 11th second of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. There's one more blast, and then a kind of an eerie silence, and then you have to listen very carefully. But a bird song rings across the meadow. The bird was singing all the time. But we can't hear the birds until the weapons stop. So I sort of want to begin with allowing that non-human being to sort of have the initial word. But World War I was likened to industrialized slaughter. And following that war, a U.S. senator, Senator Nye, N-Y-E, held 100 hearings to try and hold accountable the corporations that had helped draw and pull people into this war, which had, cost a generation. And the revulsion toward war was so strong. By April of 1935, there were 60,000 college students across the United States reported in the New York Times to have signed an oath saying, we will never fight in a foreign war. We won't enlist. And there were demonstrations and sit-downs and strikes amongst students all across the country. It had gone up to 120,000 people in an organized fashion. And then, of course, that was the time when the Kellogg-Briand Pact was signed, outlawing war forever. It's the law of the land in the United States, although it's never invoked. And there were new organizations starting up across Europe, across the United States. But at the same time, elected representatives in the US government were being told by these major war corporations that had benefited so much from World War I, do not interfere with our profit making. And so, following the ravages of World War II, we see the foundation of the United Nations, founded to eliminate the scourge of warfare. And I'll just share with you my PowerPoint briefly. Nevertheless, we were ushered into the atomic age and the threats of nuclear warfare. So, oops. You could see this. I mean, if you go online, you'll get that bird song that I was talking about. Just type into your browser last minutes of World War I.
Kathy,
Yes?
I don't think it's where you want it to be. We're seeing like a gray. It's not on the first slide for us. Is it for you?
Ah, um, well, let me go backwards.
You might need to unshare screen and try again.
Okay, so you're still not seeing anything, huh?
I know that I wasn't on the place where that bird song was supposed to happen.
Okay, so can you see my screen now?
That's better. We see the whole. Okay, now we see like sunflowers.
Right. So behind those sunflowers is the Isaiah wall immediately across from the United Nations. And etched into that wall is the line from the book of Isaiah that asks, well, first it asks the question, when shall come the day? And then it says, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift the sword against nation, neither shall they continue to learn the ways of war any longer. And of course, in spite of these illustrious words, we've had war after war after war. And in this slide, I just wanted to recall a group of youngsters in Afghanistan. These were kids who were street vendors and child laborers, but they wanted to literally do what the United Nations was calling for, beat swords into plowshares. So they collected all the toy guns they could find. And there's little Sakina with her yellow-handled hammer pounding the plastic toy guns into bits. And then they buried the plastic guns and covered it over with a tree. And they did this again and again and again all across Kabul and in other parts of Afghanistan. But nevertheless, buried in Afghanistan are the remains of so much ordnance from the many wars that were fought in Afghanistan. But of course, one of the forever wars following 9/11 was fought in Afghanistan. I also want to point out that, you know, we'll hear so much about tunnels under Gaza, and there's no doubt that those tunnels existed. I lived in Gaza during two of the earlier onslaughts, which were just a fraction of what we see now. But I would submit that the most dangerous tunnel is about 50 miles from Gaza in the Negev Desert at the Shimon Peres Nuclear Research Institute. And that's where the nuclear weapons are developed. And so all of the many bases and weapons that we've developed don't, I think, give us security or any kind of defense. In fact, they exacerbate the likelihood of ongoing wars. And it would seem to me the greatest threats we face are the threats of nuclear weapon proliferation, ongoing pandemics, and ecological collapse. And, you know, what do all of the 867 bases that the United States controls worldwide do in regard to those three threats? I had a chance to be in Amman, Jordan last week, and I said to the young people, you know, just as a thought experiment, you know, suppose I could give you one of those bases, each one of you, there were 400 people in the audience, you each get your own base, but you can't have any weapons and you can't engage in any preparation for war. What would you do with your base? And I mean, the young people were very immediate, saying, oh, well, I would turn it into a place for people to seek refuge who are fleeing from wars. Or, oh, I would use the base to manufacture an alternative to reliance on fossil fuels. Or I'd use the base for education for people with disabilities or people who aren't getting adequate education. And it's so clear what kinds of things we actually need in our world. But the war profiteers are disinterested because they make such enormous profits from selling weapons all around the world. There's something in the United States governance called the Foreign Military Sales Department. And last year, they made a record $80.9 billion in sales. And this was a 55.9% increase over the 2022 sales, meaning they were up by $51.9 billion. So you could even see on the charts in February 24th, 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the stocks just shot up for Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Atomics, and Boeing. And so, you know, factor in now the war with Israel and Hamas, and the profits are exponential. So I thought I would take some time describing a time 5 years ago, in 2017. Well, I guess that's now, sorry, 7 years ago, when a bomb was traced from its manufacture in Arizona to a small village in Arhab. And I choose this story because it seems to me it illustrates a number of problems going on simultaneously. In Saudi Arabia, there had been a decision to go to war against Yemen. And by 2017, the Yemenis had been under siege. They were being bombed. Their infrastructure was largely destroyed. Hospitals had been bombed, schools, fisheries, mosques. And particularly, there seemed to be a threat to any new source of water that would come online. So in the village of Arhab, a remote village in Yemen, people were desperate for water. Their livestock were thirsting to death. They couldn't grow their crops. And so they had done a very smart thing. They collaboratively decided to hire a rig together. And they all chipped in, and they weren't getting any water. And then the rig broke down, and then they got it repaired, and then they still kept going down and down, deeper and deeper, no water. And so people had gone into debt that they couldn't dig themselves out of. They were frantic that they were never, ever going to be able to get even their money's worth on, selling this rig. And then finally they hit water. And so the whole village was celebratory. And the men in particular gathered late at night, and they danced and they sang. And somebody had said, those places that are digging wells successfully have actually been targets, but the people in our hub said, we're so far away, who would waste a bomb on us? So at about 1 o'clock in the morning, the celebratory gathering was breaking up. It's pitch black. People are kind of trying to find their way home. And an F-15 fighter jet, which had been stationed in the King Khalid Air Force Base in southwestern Saudi Arabia, was outfitted with a kind of a laser guided bomb produced in Arizona, flown over to Saudi Arabia on a Saudi aircraft, but purchased under this foreign military sale, so that it's the Pentagon that's the broker. And once it gets there, then they put the laser guided missile and the fins and the laser guided kit onto the bomb. And it's about the length of a compact car. And the pilot, in 6 minutes, he had flown from the King Khalid Air Base over to where he could hover over the village of Arhab. And at the appointed time, he released the bomb, and it dropped out of the bottom of the airplane. The F-15 fighter jet dangled from a fuse for a few seconds, and then when the fuse broke, the bomb sort of springs to life, and it hurtled right to the spot where the villagers had been celebrating. And when the nose cone hit the ground, 200 pounds of explosives sent shards flying 8 times the speed of sound. And so if one of those shards hit you, you could be decapitated, arms and limbs could be amputated, your body could be rearranged. And so a man named Fahd was very, very badly mutilated by this bomb, and then he lost consciousness. The next morning, villagers knew something had happened, and so they went out to where they thought they'd heard these explosions, and of course the kids are all ahead of them, and there were about 100 villagers, including children, trying to understand what happened. And then more warplanes came, more F-15 fighter jets equipped with these terrible bombs, all supplied by the Raytheon Corporation, and the villagers were diving into the plants and trying to run as fast as they could. They felt like they were being chased by executioners. And a very fine writer for the New York Times, Jeffrey Stern, journeyed to this small village of Arhab to interview the survivors, to find out what happened. And he concludes his very dramatic article, The Journey of an American Bomb from Arizona to Arhab, by saying that he had gotten to know a man named Fahd, who invited him to come into his small home and sat and told him about that day, and then took Jeffrey's hand and put it to his cheekbone. And Jeffrey could feel the splinter from the bomb. And he said he had journeyed from Arizona to Arhab to trace the pathway of an American bomb, and he finally found it, the remains of it, embedded in the cheeks of a man who thought he had something to celebrate. And so we see in Gaza today repetition of the same ghastly story of the slaughter of civilians. And right now, as we look at what's happening in Gaza, the starvation starvation of children is such that people are eating combinations of grass and animal feed. And on my wall is a picture that the journalist, that Palestinian journalist and artist Sam Husseini gifted me with. And he went to Dingle in Ireland, and he makes his artwork by taking natural substances, affixing them to his canvas, and then using painting, often spray paint over it. And he calls this one the Warren of the Green, because during the Great Famine in Ireland, the Irish people had a lore, which was true, which said that many of those who died had a green stain around their lips because their last meal had been grass. And so Sam calls this the Warren of the Green. Well, in Gaza, it's not only a matter of people dying of starvation, but they're also being bombed. I remember the other folklore tradition from Ireland about Dulno, and it was a place where people who were famished and starving had walked in the cold and the bitter winds and tried to go to the officials who might have relief. It had been rumored that they were going to assess people who might be eligible for some relief, but the relief officials had gone off to a hunting lodge even further away. And as the people tried to make it to this extra and very arduous walk, many of them blew into the water and they drowned. Well, it's one thing to turn your face away from the people who are starving, but it's quite another to then drop 20,000-pound bombs on them. And this is what we see happening in Gaza today, while only 3 United States senators were willing to say we must have a ceasefire. And so we certainly have to say hands off Rafah, permanent ceasefire, and end the siege. The shipments of more weapons to Israel have continued to the tune of 100 more shipments. And this, I think, is a horrific shame. So how can we hold those who manufacture, sell, store, and prepare to use these terrible weapons? How can we hold them accountable? We decided to begin the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, focusing on 4 of the corporations: Boeing, Lockheed, General Atomics, which mainly produces drones, and Raytheon, which is now called RTX. And what we've done is release an episode every week that focuses on a war which has used weapons produced by these corporations. And then interspersed with these episodes are interviews, for example, with the lately deceased John Pilger, and also with William Astore, Christian Sorensen. So we've had about 10,000 visits to these weekly online episodes. And we very much welcome you to please do join us and encourage others to watch them. They'll all be archived. And then there are judges from places all around the world, many of whom have been survivors of wars, or who are, as Mazen Khumsia in Bethlehem, are living through the wars now, Arwa Muqtad in Yemen. And we'll ask them, after they've viewed all of the episodes, to come up with their conclusions. And our hope is that people will be very, very open to kind of a BDS, a boycott and divestment against the United States militarism, against the corporations that make these weapons. We're very indebted to Christian Sorensen for showing us how plausible it is that the various factories manufacturing these weapons could convert to making things that are good and useful for people. I want to emphasize again that the greatest threats we face come from ecological collapse, nuclear weapon proliferation, and the possibility of yet another worldwide pandemic. These are threats, but these military bases and all of our weapons don't defend us from those threats. In fact, they exacerbate the possibility of more enmity, more war, more bitterness, ongoing exchanges of weapons that could lead up to a nuclear weapon exchange. And they certainly lessen the collaboration, the international collaboration that we actually need amongst world powers in order to help solve the problems that we face as we go forward into our future. So I do thank you for listening to all of that, and I'll welcome any questions, comments, ideas, recommendations that you have regarding the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal and regarding ways to bring about actual consequences so that those who profit from wars might find that they no longer can make the same profit that they could make if they would convert and turn away from war.
Thank you, Kathy. I found that recording. Would you like me to share it?
Let's try that. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see how it goes. I'll just do it through audio, I think. That is the most likely to work properly. So I'm gonna
That's it. Keep going.
I don't know why it stopped.
Oh.
I'll try again.
So thank you, Amy. For those who may have joined us a little bit late, that's an audio recording of the last seconds of World War I. And the blasts, the explosions continued right through the 11th minute of the 11th hour of the 11th day of 2018. And then when there's an eerie silence, if you listen carefully, you hear a bird song. So I've often thought, let that bird be heard, but we can't hear the birds while the bombs are exploding. So thoughts, ideas, comments, conversation?
Yeah, first I'll let folks know you can put things in the chat, or you can use the hand raise function. That makes it easy for me to find you, and I will unmute you. So either of those will work. I want to say that was very moving, Kathy, and people might need a minute to kind of catch up, but go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
No, just
Okay, well, we have a hand up, so let's hear from Ryan.
Kathy, thanks for sharing a little bit about your story, and thank you for everything you're doing to put a stop to, I guess, the madness going on in the world. I'm curious, in your time doing this, what's been the most effective way you've seen in terms of engaging our political representatives to take a stand? You mentioned earlier only three, I think, senators have called for a ceasefire in Gaza. I've reached out to, all the representation here in New Hampshire, and I've got little to no response. Even little, I'm not even asking for, people to necessarily hear me out and agree with my side calling for a ceasefire, but I'm not even really getting much response from any of the senators or reps. Is there anything that you can suggest that would be meaningful to draw them out to the spotlight and force some sort of action?
No, Ryan, I recently read an article in the London Review of Books by Pankaj Mishra. And toward the end of his article, it's a very good article about all that's been happening in Gaza. He says that people are coping with embitterment and madness. And I actually just want to acknowledge that. I think that the collective frustration we feel, because, I've never seen anything like this, people turning out in their hundreds and in their thousands all around the world again and again and again. When those of you who could think back to 2003 shock and awe, Ripley said, "Oh, this is the largest demonstration ever." But then once the war started, it just kind of evaporated, it seemed. Well, this movement has hung tight, but we seem to be, in a sense, unable to budge this vice-like grip that the military-industrial complex has. I think they know that most of the elected representatives have so many, if not, major military contractors in their districts. At this point, they've got all kinds of subsidiary contractors who manufacture the parts, and these parts are necessary, and people don't want to lose jobs. And so it's so deliberately like sprinkled all across our country. My hope is that we can say to every elected representative, we will have a long memory of what stance you've taken with regard to the slaughter of civilians in Gaza and the ongoing genocidal ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. And when 2026 rolls along, we will remember where you stood. For the presidential election, I think we should keep on leaning on the Democrats and Joe Biden as hard as we possibly can to say this is untenable. For him to go down with Netanyahu would seem to be so foolish. I think the International Court of Justice is not a lost cause. We might have wanted that ICJ to speak out more strongly, but as I understand it, after the third shameful veto that the United States exercised in the United Nations, it could then next go over to the General Assembly, and a vote in the General Assembly feasibly could oust Israel from the United Nations. I mean, to my mind, the United States no longer should be playing a role, certainly not in the Security Council, but I really wonder if we're not an outlier in terms of the entire United Nations because of our refusal to allow a ceasefire to pass in this utterly crucial time when so many people will not only die from bombing, but also from starvation and disease, and it could be stopped. In terms of consequences for the corporations, I noticed that, for instance, the Palestinian group Al-Haq is now collaborating with the Campaign Against the Arms Trade in Europe to see if they can't bring some of the corporate heads that are supplying weapons into the courts and sue them. There's also been an effort in French human rights groups to go after Saudi Arabia for importing United States weapons and using these weapons against people in Yemen. So there could be increasing efforts to work through the courts. Initially, with the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, subpoenas were delivered to each of these major companies that we're focusing on, the 4 companies. And then when they didn't comply with the subpoenas in 90 days, people went back with contempt citations, and then there have been civil disobedience actions at those companies and also at L3 Harris. I noticed that here in the Midwest, 29 college-age students just blocked the entrance to a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. And so I hope those kinds of actions will continue. But in terms of consequence, if their stock market holdings don't go down, I realize it's going to be very, very difficult for us to turn these corporations around and to appeal to conscience.
Thanks, Kathy. Ryan, a lot of us share your frustration. The calls and the letters and we have weekly vigils at our reps. We've had numerous meetings with their staff, and only one of them is starting to budge at all. but still. Yeah. We're looking for that secret as well. But I hear what you're saying, Kathy, that there's a whole other, there's a lot behind all of this. This is one of these moments that we see how much our democracy and our power has been usurped by money, by corporations, by legislation and Supreme Court rulings and the like that have elevated people with power so high that our voices are tiny. Because I know what it's like to protest when no one else is on my side, right? Usually we're like this tiny voice in the wilderness, right, Kathy? And now we actually know we have the majority of people with us. And it seems like that should make a difference. And it's very tough that it's not. I want Janet's question here to go in. She says, for any of us with money in the stock market, do you have suggestions for how not to invest in these companies?
Well, I think maybe that could also go with the question of what could these companies be making? And particularly in the face of ecological collapse, I think, when we start to think about the antiquity of our national transportation systems, why don't we have the kinds of high-speed trains that could greatly eliminate the car travel, the car culture that people are so dependent on, and these huge big trucks lumbering across our roads? So there could be manufacture of alternatives to reliance on fossil fuels. The companies could move much further in terms of creating the access to solar energy, to wind energy, to wind turbines that are implanted in the seas. There could be a much greater effort to retrofit the housing stock so that it was more compatible with sensible approaches to climate change. There could certainly be ways in which these scientists could be mandated not to investigate and work out ways to have more artificial intelligence to deliver bombs on drones, but instead to start to direct that toward different ways to cure diseases, different ways to deliver food more efficiently, different ways to grow food more efficiently. If scientists are told this is what we want you to work on, they'll work on it. But if we constantly say we just want weapons that will be more and more destructive and fearsome and less under human control, then that's what we'll get. I think we also need to be avoiding and trying to dismantle the pharmacy industrial complex along with the military industrial complex. So we don't want to put money into big pharma in terms of stocks. We don't want to put it into more and more means of creating ecological collapse. I think it's also heartening to see that some social justice groups have banded together and combined their resources so that they have more heft in terms of what they withdraw from and what they invest in. And I think, I have to acknowledge it's difficult for me to say something favorable about economic sanctions being imposed on a country because I saw what the economic sanctions did to Iraq. And once you start cherry picking, saying, well, I like these sanctions, but I don't like these ones, you bump into problems. But I sure think that boycott and divestment makes a great deal of sense in terms of the U.S. military industrial complex and calling on other countries all around the world to boycott and to divest from consuming this product. I mean, can you imagine it? For those of you who might have been late to the call, we had a 59.9% increase in military sales to over 100 countries that purchased U.S. weapons. And this was up by 51.9 billion, so that the sales from the Foreign Military Sales Department amounted to $80.9 billion just in 2024. I see Will's hand is up.
Yeah, Will, I'm coming to unmute you. There you go. should elect.
Okay, so I'm good? You can hear me?
Yes.
Good. Well, Kathy, great to see you again. I'm concerned about the fact that money translates into power and control. And Citizens United comes to mind, should be overturned. It won't be with this Congress. The public financing of federal elections, so we can have public, but that went by the way, as we all know. But here's the third point. Vets for Peace have sent letters to Secretary of State Blinken and all of his staff concerning the violation of numerous laws, the arms export, the Leahy laws, I'm trying to think of the other one. We actually have a War Crimes Act. So there's something like 6 acts, laws, that are not being enforced. In other words, and they know they can get away with it. So Vets for Peace is trying to educate people about these violations of our own laws. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I was so glad that Terry Lodge put together the document with those laws,
Right.
and Vets for Peace have been delivering that to federal buildings all across the country. And I think that's a good idea. Federal buildings aren't so accessible always, but if it's possible to call a press conference, be outside the federal building, say, why are we violating our own law? And, the Independent last weekend reached retired Senator Leahy and asked him, is the United States violating the law named after you? And he said, in a word, yes, that it's illegal to send more weapons to Israel when it is engaging in such clear
Genocide.
and devastating violations of the right to life.
Well, the other thing is the Democrats and Republicans are basically, as you said, only 3 Democrats have advocated for a ceasefire. I mean, who'd we vote for in the next, round here besides the presidential election? I mean,
Yeah.
senators are up every 6 years.
Right. Well, I do think we should keep an eye toward 2026, and look at every candidate that wants to win an election and let them know that we will have a long memory for where they stand at this point. And I do draw considerable hope from some of the new alliances that we're seeing in this country. When you see Jewish Voice for Peace walking with Christian evangelical Black ministers from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., I find that hopeful. But we're also seeing shifting alliances worldwide. I want to say the means you use determines the end you get. And I don't want to adjust myself to militarism coming from any point. But it is of interest to see that in Yemen, groups that were at the throats of the Houthis and declared sworn enemies are now saying, you know what, we're going to defect from our alliance with that group that was fighting against the Houthi. We're going to fight with the Houthi because of what is being done in Gaza and because the Houthis are standing up for the Palestinians in ways that others aren't. So that's what I mean also by shifting alliances. I do think it's a crucial time to invoke the words of those who have been recognized for decades as beacons of serious nonviolent direct action, nonviolent resistance, and prime among them, I would still turn to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and those brave words of his, that he would not adjust himself to accepting militarism and violence as a way to solve problems any more than he would adjust himself to accepting segregation and discrimination.
Thanks, Kathy. Here's a question. Can you speak about AIPAC? What it is and how does it fit in?
So the American-Israeli political action commissions have been, for many decades now, cultivating their capacity to control people who are elected to office such that they can threaten the person and say, if you don't go along with what we're insisting on, if you don't support the government of Israel, no matter what it does, then we will make sure that your opponent is going to get flooded with so much money and so much strength to defeat you that your political career could be over. So it's almost as though democracy is so severely undermined by AIPAC's power because they have built that capacity, and they've used the Shah, they've used the Holocaust, I think, in a way that has communicated that anybody who disagrees with them is anti-Semitic. So we have that to fight against as well. And, I think that the same tactics that the Nazis used are now very clearly being expostulated by demagogues in Israel. We see it again and again. We hear vicious statements being made. We see actions being carried out, which are horrifically cruel. And so, the idea that it's anti-Semitic to declare that you definitely cannot tolerate those kinds of actions is absurd. But this is part of the education challenge that's carved out for us. There certainly is no shortage of extremely good spokespeople. There are also some comics who I think are probably reaching further and further to make people think, oh yeah, that doesn't make any sense, does it? There's art and music and theater that's being used, but we're just, I believe, at a point where, as you said, Amy, we could be at a portal, but this is not the time to give up. I remember Phil Berrigan saying, don't get tired. I think this is the time to keep on pushing as much as we possibly can. I will say I've been a war tax refuser since 1980. I remember I was a teacher at St. Ignatius College Prep, and I went to the high school treasurer, and I said, could you please, John, lower my salary beneath the taxable income? And I think he wanted to call the school psychologist right away, and he said, well, what about the IRA? And I said, oh no, John, I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in the IRA. Well, I thought he meant the Irish Republican Army, and he was thinking about a financial document. But so I was lucky. I was able to continue with that for many decades, and just said I can't and I won't. And I've had a comfortable life and an interesting life. But I know that that's something most people can't do, but we still need to make it, clear, hold up the mirror to ourselves that, the Air Force isn't out there holding bake sales to raise the money. They're taking it from the pockets of average, ordinary people who don't want to spend their money in this way. So I think we do have to keep on educating the public to recognize we are the ones who are being billed for this process that could lead us to annihilation, toward planetary omnicide.
Yeah. I will say, are you looking at the chat, Kathy? It sounded like you were. You don't have to. I just wondered.
Yeah, I am so interested in what Bill Woodward just posted. I couldn't read all of it, Bill, but The Intercept has started an alternative to AIPAC. Is that right?
Yes. There's going to be a campaign around this. National Peace Action is involved. I did want to mention one thing that we didn't know, but learned through this is in New Hampshire, it does seem connected. We have one of our 4 reps who is taking a lot of money from AIPAC. And he's been the most impossible to deal with. So, and I know there's been some research that's charting, how much support do they get from AIPAC around the country, and where are they on a ceasefire, et cetera. And there is a definite link. And oh, go ahead. You're gonna
Oh, I
have,
just wanted to say also this, the city council resolutions invoking a ceasefire might also be another avenue. And there have been quite a few that just passed in the past week. Ithaca, I believe Binghamton, my city of Chicago. So that's another way to lean in.
yeah, yeah, we have to be much bigger and louder to scream over this, this money and these other things that they have. It's not that we can't do it, but it takes a lot, right?
Mhm.
I also wanted to say along those lines, I think you must know Greg Coleridge from the Move to Amend campaign.
Oh, right, yeah.
We're just about to endorse that New Hampshire Peace Action. We had him speak in the fall. I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit about that as another longer term, bigger picture kind of possibility. It's okay if you don't, but
Well, yeah, certainly with regard to corporate personhood and the idea that corporations are persons, it's false. And yet it continually puts us in a level of being subservient to these major corporations. Um, I remember when I was in college, Noam Chomsky came to my campus and I was starstruck. And he said, the United States is basically communicating to every other country around the world. If you do not subordinate yourselves to be subservient to our national interest, we will eliminate you. And I that's been borne out throughout my life. If you don't believe it, well, take a look at Iraq, devastated as it is. But it's also, I think, as though the corporations are saying to us, if you don't subordinate yourselves to be subservient to our goals, which are all about profit and bloating our already excessive wealth, we can just dismiss you completely or eliminate your capacity to be comfortable or successful.
yeah. Folks
I
can
feel
raise
like
their
I should
hand.
also bring to you the lines of one of the young people that I was with in Amman, Jordan. You know, I had been in Afghanistan when a hospital was bombed, and it just seems so hideous to be bombing hospitals. The United States with a C-14 transport, I'm sorry, a C-130 transport outfitted with Bofors cannons and Gatling guns, had flown over the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, and for an hour and a half repeatedly attacked the emergency room and the intensive care unit. And I sometimes would go and donate blood at the Italian it's called the Italian Surgical Center for Victims of War in Kabul. So I met a youngster who had survived that bombing. He was a pharmacist and he had just barely survived. He took shrapnel in his back and he still had an internal catheter and intravenous feeding and was in a wheelchair and yellow complexion. But he told about this horrific day. And then my young friends were doing the translating for me. And he said, well, where is she from? And I said, well, America. And then they asked the young Afghans, well, um, why is she here? And I said, well, we want to be able to tell the stories like yours at our home. And he said, well, ask the question, why would your people want to do this to us? We were only trying to help people. And I wished so much at that point that somehow I could find him now and tell him, that same plane that bombed your hospital was used by the Jordanian Air Force to drop the food packages in Gaza. Now, there's a lot of problem with dropping these food packages, and some have actually killed people when they've landed, and they're only able to put 4 items inside of a package. And for grown men during Ramadan to be breaking the fast with baby formula and water could break your heart. But one of the young people said to me, thank you for your presentation, but does your country think it's better to bomb people with full stomachs? And that kind of captures it. We talk about getting some kind of food aid in while there's a steady stream of bombs that can destroy and kill and maim and traumatize. And of course, there are the children who now have written on their limbs, wounded child, no surviving family, WCNSF. And, those children meant us no harm. They're not aligned with any particular political party, and they have a right to live, a right to life.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you. I certainly would welcome being in touch with any of you who would have questions or comments or ideas further. I'm very much part of an effort to try to resettle young Afghans in safer havens. And so I can tell you that that's one of the things that gives me hope, seeing the permaculturists in Portugal opening up their hearts and homes to young Afghans and having reciprocal relationships. And so there's so many ways that I know we're all planting seeds and doing all that we can to abolish all wars. So thank you for your time. If you ever wanted to get involved with World Beyond War further, we'd certainly welcome that as well.
Great. We have had a number of World Beyond War speakers in this series, and we'll have more in the future, and hope that everyone here does go check them out. We're very big fans.
All right.
And I should be wrapping us up here. I'm going to put a few things in the chat and also read out a few things. First of all, thank you, Kathy. Thank you for sharing with us tonight. Thank you for your life's work. It's been an inspiration. It is an inspiration. But a lot of us have, gotten a lot from you over the years and appreciate it. And know that you can follow and learn more at merchantsofdeath.org. Also see, I'm going to put something else in the chat, nhpeaceaction.org. This is where you can find information on what we're up to and the programs we're doing and different campaigns. And also where you can find our Monday night program series recorded. We have a YouTube channel, and a lot of our presentations are there. So if you've missed one or you want to send your friends to watch this one, you can do that. And here's a little taste of some things we have coming up. If you're in New Hampshire, please join us in person for an upcoming Ceasefire Now Vigil for Peace. We're calling for a permanent ceasefire, end to U.S. military aid to Israel, and humanitarian assistance. This week's schedule is Wednesday, March 13th, 2 to 3 p.m. at Representative Pappas's office in Dover, and Thursday, March 14th, noon to 1 at City Plaza in Concord. Our next online Peace and Justice conversation will be Monday, March 26th, 7 to 8 p.m. on Zoom, and that is going to be an update on the work that New Hampshire Peace Action is doing, including an opportunity to meet our new director, who started just a month or so ago and is really jumping in it. So we'd love for you to meet him and for us to update you on the various things that we've been doing, the ceasefire, vote, write-in, vote, ceasefire, and other stuff we've been up to. This series is free and open to everyone. That said, it means a lot to us to have your support, and would love you to donate, nhpeaceaction.org/donate. And now, before we wrap up, let's just give a very visible thank you to Kathy Kelly for everything.
All best wishes to each of you. Thank you.